You know what that makes me think of? It's like he licks his finger, sees where the wind is blowing, and then he'll just do that.
Yeah,
Which actually isn't true because on the minimum wage, you do that and everyone wants the $15 minimum wage, but he won't do it. So, I mean, yeah, it starts off pretty much. I mean, let's look at just the title. Welcome to the new progressive era. I mean, just started like the new progressive era. Like, where am I missing something, Briahna? Am I not seeing it?
I will caveat this with the fact that often writers don't pick their own titles, but if this were me, there's nothing that I would write that could ever have that title plausibly attached to it.
Even be skewed right into thinking that. Okay, let's get into it. I want to start here with Ilhan Omar because, like you said, Ilhan Omar actually has been speaking up more against the Biden administration. Really, to me, it looked like it started a lot after that interview she had on MSNBC, where I think it was Mehdi Hassan was pushing her, and essentially she didn't look great in that, okay? And progressives didn't look great in that. And so it has felt a little bit like she's been pushing back more. So let's start here. Among Omar and her colleagues, priorities had been raising the minimum wage to $15. Context on this is they're just talking about Biden and the American Rescue Plan. And I mean, it's kind of saying how it was pretty progressive, even though we know it wasn't. So let's start here. Among Omar and her colleagues, priorities have been raising the minimum wage to $15, a goal Biden professed to share. But when push came to shove in the Senate and a procedural obstacle that was an advisory opinion that by someone who I definitely didn't know who the parliamentarian was. I don't know about you.
Nope.
Biden gave in. Many progressives were angry. Biden personally called Pramila Jayapal, Democrat, Washington, and the Congressional Progressive Caucus chair, and explained the White House's thinking. He suggested that Jayapal and some colleagues talk with his team about a long-term strategy for shared goals, and that meeting actually happened with Biden's chief of staff, Ronald Klain.
Just because you put a personal touch on screwing somebody doesn't make the screwing any less painful.
Exactly. And there seems to be a new standard, and the new standard is we're being talked to now. So it's feeling better. We're being right. It's literally the legislative version of I see you, I hear you, I'm going to ignore you. And I'm wondering, what is a long-term strategy on $15 minimum wage? The damn bill itself was already a long-term strategy because it was $15 by 2026.
Correct.
When $15 right now in today's day and age without inflation in 5 years is already not enough, which I learned, which I mean, it's pretty easy to know, but when you were talking to the Amazon employees was saying Jeff Bezos goes around flaunting this $15 minimum wage when we can barely survive on that in Bessemer, Alabama.
Correct.
So
we were in the longest period in American history without a $15 minimum wage since we got a minimum. We're in the longest period in American history without a minimum wage raise since we got a minimum wage in 1938. Productivity is up through the roof. Workers have never provided more value to the bosses, and yet we're being told that this bare minimum is not going to pass. And moreover, as we've talked about, I don't know if you want to get back into it, but the way the issue was framed around the parliamentarian also cut off any conversation for a minimum wage raise that's lower than 15. So obviously I don't support that, and I don't think progressives should have cottoned on to that. But very strategically, in other parts of the COVID bill negotiations, there was a kind of a quantitative conversation about how much the check should be, how much the unemployment should be, etc. But because Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema had this procedural exit route dangled in front of them, Kirsten Sinema and Joe Manchin, who have both supported minimum wage raises in the past, to a lesser degree than 15, but have supported them in the past, were not called upon, were not asked to negotiate around the $15 minimum wage. Instead, what you got was a declarative, no, we got to take this out of the bill. Of course, the parliamentarians' ruling did not mean they actually had to take it out of the bill. They could have ignored it and left it in, at which point somebody would have had to bring an amendment to take it out of the bill, which would have required 60 votes.
60 votes.
Which they didn't have. Instead, they took it out of the bill so that Bernie had to bring an amendment to put it back in the bill, which required 60 votes, which they also didn't have. So as David Sirota has pointed out, they took a 50-vote situation, you know, are you going to vote for this or not? Can you get 50 plus one? And turned it into a 60-vote situation to give all the politicians cover for the fact that their corporate donors don't want them to support a $15 minimum wage, despite the fact that overwhelming majorities of Americans across the political spectrum want exactly that.
And does that not, I mean, to me, like if I'm in Congress and I see Chuck Schumer take it out of the bill, essentially filibustering themselves, right, forcing that 60-vote situation, why does that not arise anger and frustration and people going out there and speaking out against it? Like, that's what's frustrating to me. I'm not saying you can control everything that these people do, but you can expose them for making it more difficult to get to a place and into legislation passing which they claim to support.
Because they don't know. Because the average American isn't reading the Daily Poster, they're reading the Atlantic, and this is the version of events that they get. And it is frustrating. You know, Anna knows better. He knows what happened, because I know I talked about it at length in the course of our interview. He knows what happened.
Right.
And I don't know why it is that other people don't either appreciate the value of communicating those underlying facts, because the scaffolding of acceptance is built with the belief that nothing more could have been done. And talking in detail about the strategic parliamentary obstacles the Democratic Party itself constructed is crucial to understanding why the left, the real left, is angry in this moment. And they refuse to write about that and refuse to print it. I see now that I'm going to have to finish this stupid article that I really didn't feel like writing because I have other things to do in my life. But literally, the only way that anything like that is going to get published is if we write it.
Right.
Apparently. And have access to whatever platforms are willing to publish these things. But I'm really appreciative to you and the others in this left media landscape who are continuing to surface the reality.
Truth. That's true. That I appreciate you too. Let's keep diving into this, because there's a lot of really good gems in here. This was, after with Biden chief of staff Ronald Klain, they had the meeting. Ilhan Omar said that was a huge signaling. It suggests that progressives might not get everything they want, but she said the administration understands that we are not willing to be taken for granted anymore. That's not true. That's just not true. Okay, I just want to let everyone know that is not true, because the strategy that progressives have put out there is that even if they are ignored, even if something like the one thing that Joe Biden promised Bernie Sanders is taken out of the bill, and it's, instead of everyone getting a $15 minimum wage in this country, progressives got a call from the chief of staff, then they're okay with that, and they're not gonna do anything under any circumstances to be adversarial. They want to just propose good and nice things. So that's just not true. So I would really appreciate it if they stopped saying that shit, because that doesn't, like you were saying, that doesn't help anyone. Okay, I'm not saying that progressives in Go ahead. I'm sorry. I'm just going on.
No. I'm with you. It feels like at a certain point, progressivism as a fundraising exercise. At a certain point, if you say the things that progressives in the public who support these policies want to hear, it becomes, but you don't ever act on it. You don't actually ever fight or at least call attention to the obstacles that are really there to getting those things. Chiefly Joe Biden and people like Ron Klain, who are going on television, and saying things like, "Oh, I'm not sure if you can overrule the parliamentarian," is what he said in an interview in early March or late February when the ruling first came down. Oh, the ruling, the advisory opinion.
Right. The ruling.
You know,
like it was a judge or something.
He was asked actually, and to her credit, by Joanne Reed in an interview, well, can't you overrule the parliamentarian? Can't you, by the way, Joanne Reed, big K-Hive person, big supporter of Kamala Harris, can't the first Black female vice president, doesn't she have the power to overrule the parliamentarian? Why, yes, she does. Power to you, queen. Will she? Absolutely not. Ron Klain played the fool on television and acted like he didn't even know that was a possibility. And subsequently, Jen Psaki and the rest of the Biden administration said that absolutely not. We are going to respect the parliamentarian's decision, because apparently the parliamentarian's decision deserves more respect than millions of predominantly Black women who are working a minimum wage. The average minimum wage worker in America is a 35-year-old Black woman or something like that. It's disproportionately, you know, and apparently that is not the kind of representation that matters in Washington.
Ilhan Omar continued. I guess it wasn't Omar, it was Ro Khanna saying this, but the progressive wing is ascendant in terms of the new members, in terms of grassroots energy, in terms of advocating policies that most Democrats support. Now, I would actually agree with that. In terms of grassroots energy, the progressive wing does have that, and the policies, the progressive wing does have that.
Yes, but I can't pay my rent with grassroots energy.
Exactly, exactly. And here's what frustrates me once again. He says, but the progressive wing is not in the positions of power yet. Another way to put it is that progressives won the conversation but lost the primary. The man in power is not their man, but he's hemmed in by their ideas. That's also not true. So much of this is being framed in the ways that we want. And Jayapal always goes back to, she even said in an interview, we want to be a propositional force, not an oppositional one or a contrarian force, but a propositional one. We want to frame things in the right way. We want to propose good and nice things that they don't ever get passed. That's not our problem. We're in the business of proposing these things. And Ro Khanna, once again, which is just so frustrating, which tells me that they're not going to be doing anything in the future. And all these articles that have been coming out are true. They're not going to be any type of oppositional force, because he says they're not in the positions of power yet. So because they're not actually the Speaker of the House, which won't happen in this Democratic Party for 50 to 100 years, because they're not in that position, they don't have any power. How frustrating is it for you to continue to hear that when that's just patently false?
I mean, wasn't there a little thing a couple months ago? It's hard for me to remember, where
I don't know what it was called.
To decide who the Speaker of the House was going to be. Wasn't there like an opportunity for leverage where to be Speaker of the House, you needed like those 6 or so progressive votes, and they could have held up the vote for consecutive rounds indefinitely until they eventually had to concede, so that they would vote for Pelosi or vote for someone in the alternative. I seem to recall there was a point of enormous leverage where the downside, hey, say you don't want to like play games with a must pass bill because people are so hit up because of COVID. I don't accept that, but let's pretend that I appreciate the interest there. What if we instead leveraged a vote where the only thing that really was at play was whether or not Nancy Pelosi were Speaker of the House? Low stakes. We're not talking COVID relief checks. We're not talking vaccine disbursements. All we're talking about is whether one woman gets a title or not. Even then, in the context of force the vote in January, people talked about it as though it was life or death, cataclysmic consequences. And oh my God, the progressives will lose everything. They'll lose the farm if they, God forbid, withheld their vote. And we got to save up our political capital for the fight for 15. I think you might have been somewhere familiar with that argument.
Somewhere in there, I was
central to that whole discourse.
Somewhere in that. It's just, I mean, after that point, I think a lot of people were awakened to, the situation we find ourselves in. And when power was really there to be grasped and used for the first time, that progressives actually had any institutional power in decades, that opportunity was missed. The first must-pass bill, first reconciliation bill, that opportunity was missed. And how many more opportunities at this do you think you're going to get? That's where I fall a lot of the time, is because You know, I look at these as opportunities, right? You're never gonna. I'm not saying you're gonna get Medicare for all, $15 minimum wage, free college, ending the wars, green, all of that in one swoop, right? But if we're working to get there, then let's start somewhere, right? So you're telling me we're gonna go through about $2 to $3 trillion bills, and we're not gonna get any of that in there? How much more? How much more of a leash do you think that we're gonna get? It's just not gonna happen. And because Joe Manchin's not going to overturn the filibuster, you're going to get 2 or 3 cracks at it. And if you don't do anything now, you're not signaling you're going to do anything with the next reconciliation bill, you got 2 more shots at getting something in there, and it just doesn't look like that's going to happen.
They know nothing. They know nothing's going to happen, which is why you have to frame what has already happened as a progressive feat of historical proportions, and that's how you get articles like this. He's already done it, guys. Mission accomplished.
Mission accomplished.
He's heralded in the next progressive era. Yeah.
Anon writes, one explanation for Biden's progressive turn is that he has never been an ideologue. He has lodestars standing up for the middle class, favoring unions, and so on. But those lodestars have led him to varied results. His superpower, it is often said, is possessing the sense of where the Democratic Party is, where the median of the party is at a given moment. He is the politician in the best sense of the word. Reich told me that is, he sees a parade and he runs and gets in front of it. As long as the parade is not inconsistent with his values, that's the secret here, is that he has no strong ideological preconceptions. The interesting thing is he's very open-minded. He is able to see changes in the operating consensus, the conventional wisdom, and almost intuitively, I don't know that it's conscious. I think he just understands the change and latches onto it. You know what that makes me think of? It's like he licks his finger, sees where the wind is blowing, and then he'll just do that.
Yeah.
Which actually isn't true, because on the minimum wage, you do that, and everyone wants the $15 minimum wage, but he won't do it.
The idea,
so he actually is an ideologue.
Yes. And the idea of painting a fence sitter as a positive quality. I mean, Dante literally wrote A Circle in Hell for fence sitters and people who were unideologically moored, and people who, imagine saying it's championing someone who just sees a parade and gets at the front of it, ignoring the fact that some of those parades are filled with Nazis and segregationists. Oh, wait, Joe Biden is a famous friend and eulogizer of a segregationist.
A literal segregationist.
His legacy of anti-blackness, his legacy of of frankly railroading Anita Hill, his entire political legacy, speaks to that quality, and it's bad. It's abhorrent. It's embarrassing. And it was frankly disqualifying to him to be the president of the United States of America. And now we're being asked to celebrate the very quality that resulted in a mass incarceration crisis that decimated my community, and that continues to have downstream effects, the likes of which we saw over and over and over again in 3 separate instances of police violence caught on camera last week? And then the past week? It's exhausting, and it's a form of gaslighting.
Give me one sec.
Sure.
Sorry, we lost our headset for a sec. That's my one technical difficulty for the day. No, but I mean 100%, everything you're saying. It's really frustrating for me, and I know for you, because we were led to believe. And we were led, and the people were saying this in 2016, 2017, and I didn't agree with it 100% then, but I want to say that I was wrong, because it feels like we were sheep herded into this party, and now it seems like you have progressives, right? You have a section of the left, of the broader left, who actually do support these policies, but now we're kind of sectioned off, right? On one side, we have people saying it's great that you support the policy, but if you're not going to do anything to get there, then it's really just the same, right? Then it's really just virtue signaling at that point. And then you have another subsection that's saying, okay, it's just, there are only so many of them, they can only do so much. And so we are even more fragmented than we were 3 or 4 years ago. So what do you think we need to do to kind of is it just going to have to be evidentiary, right? What's going on in society, what's happening legislatively, just to bring us back almost to square one, where we're all actually pushing and pressuring these politicians to actually start using the little power that they have to try and get some of this stuff passed?
I have been doing a lot of readings. I've been really interested in Socialist Alternative, which is a socialist organization with a somewhat different ideological moorings, or I should say, has somewhat more concretized ideological commitments than DSA, but similar in nature in terms of an organization. And one of the things I've really enjoyed is doing readings that offer some historical perspective. And most recently, we read about the 1968 French Revolution that I had never read about. And, looking at a historical moment where the people really did, despite not having particularly high union participation rates, it was about 20%, twice as much as we got, but not overwhelming. People rise up and take over their factories, block management, their offices when they wouldn't comply, students shutting down their universities, towns taking over their own kind of management and infrastructure and leadership, taking over the power companies and making sure that food and milk was dispersed to poor families. I mean, really doing it, just coming right up to the edge of people taking the reins and imagining a better world. It's really inspiring, but from our American perspective can seem so far away.
Yeah, daunting. And there's no way that'll happen.
But here's the thing. Right. It seemed far away in the 60s in France, too. They were experiencing an economic boom. Things were really good as far as these things go in their capitalism. And yet the conditions were right because you can't always predict them. And the thing that seems to be the real barrier is a belief that things could be different and an ability to imagine them as different. And that's why I think sometimes articles like this are so frustrating, because they are part of a project in reimagining the present world as being on that trajectory of progress and pretending that the present world is adequate and good.
Right.
Which obviously takes the wind out of the sails of any revolutionary impetus to make things enormously better and collapsing the differences between the various factions of the left who are fighting for dramatically different things. And what I would like to see is some of these progressives actually elevating and foregrounding and spotlighting the extent to which the Democratic Party is the obstacle, not convincing voters. The polls show that everybody agrees on what policies we need. All of the big ticket items, there's complete agreement. We are not a balkanized country in the way that the left and the right wants to pretend that we are. It's a country that's balkanized from the top down. And the bottom is not being heard in the least. And the progressive fighters that were launched into office on the premise that they were going to speak for those people are not doing so. I'm sorry. If you're not pointing out that Joe Biden took more money from private healthcare interests than anybody else in the race, if you're not pointing out that he had a meeting with business interests just before he announced that the parliamentarian was probably going to rule against the $15 minimum wage being included in the bill, and lo and behold, she did. If you're not pointing out those kind of structural corruption style reasons that Joe Biden and the Democratic Party isn't meeting the needs of the moment, then at a certain point you are part of the problem.
Yeah. And
then the pressure is going to start going from you need to pressure Joe Biden to you need to be pressured yourself, because you are not, you are, to your point, Justin, sheep herding. and causing more harm than good, because you are letting the steam out of real revolutionary energy that exists. To your other point.
Yeah, and I mentioned this a lot on the show, and I think this is, in sports, right? A lot of times a team, what we talk about is there's a standard, right? There's a standard level of behavior, there's a standard level of expectation, and that standard is applied all across the board, right? From the best player to the worst player, right? That standard is set. What we have here in this country is an issue with setting standards according to what the expectation and the gravity of the moment and crisis that we're in currently. So it's almost like we were like one of those things where, because we have no standards for anything, we're actually fighting for a $15 minimum wage. And then I hear on your podcast you interviewed the Amazon employee who says that's not enough, right? So we're in a situation where we're fighting for something that's not even enough, right?
Yeah.
Where we're fighting for, we have people out there saying Joe Biden's infrastructure plan is pretty good when it's half of the bare minimum that's necessary to actually get this country to a place where we need to be. And so personally, I will not be doing that anymore. Okay. Because I see the real issues. I see the real crises out there. I see the real hurt. And so to me, there's no point in fighting for something that's below that level. And I wish that progressives and people in Congress and just the left as a whole, we would start doing that, because that's actually how maybe you actually get a $15 minimum wage, even if it's not enough. You have to fight for more. And you have to be willing to, like we've said so many times, you have to be willing to actually sacrifice something. And so if you say, okay, they're gonna tell you that, this is needed and necessary, and yes, it is. But like you said earlier, we can't keep doing this time after time after time after time, accepting crumbs, because this country is at a fever pitch, right? And as the economy starts to open back up, what do we see happening? Food prices going up, gas prices going up, housing prices going up. Healthcare prices will go up once those pharma companies start charging exorbitant rates for these vaccine booster shots, et cetera, et cetera. And just with inflation in general, healthcare costs are going to go up. So I think we need to understand that as a society, there's going to be millions more people that will struggle because of this. So the time is now. The time is now to act. We don't have till 2024, 2026, 2030, maybe get more progressives in there. No. We need this now. And that's the message that I will be continuing to urge. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. I'm very grateful for you championing that message, Justin, because the gaslighting is real. The gaslighting is real. I don't know. We talk a lot on the left about, who's a grifter and what the motives of such and such person is. And I think part of why I don't engage in that discourse is because if it's true, it almost is too demoralizing to think of people being so kind of coldly motivated by something like money or access, because there's no chance in like persuading them, right? And it becomes like, I just prefer to think it's ideological and they're mistaken, not because I'm naive, but because it's like easier on my conscience just to believe that, it's less painful or something.
Right.
But moments like this and articles like these, it's like, I don't know. We have a ways to go.
Yeah.
That's all. But it's fine. There's more of us than ever. They're trying to deplatform people in left media and all of that, but at least we do have access to these, digital modes of communication, and we have our own infrastructure, and, we're part of a historical project, and people's eyes are open and they've been radicalized, and Bernie took us a certain part of the way, and it's just now time for others together to get across that finish line. So
For sure. Well, it's always a pleasure talking to you, Briahna. I love Bad Faith Podcast. I talk about it all the time on my show because it's just amazing. It's so informative. I learned so much from that. It's strategic, it's tactical. I love learning all that, and I think you're doing a great job, you and Virgil, on really informing the left on the next steps, right? So I appreciate you coming on. Is there any first off, let everyone know where they can find you. I'm sure everyone already knows where to find you, and is there any other interviews you have coming up with any guests, that you can announce that you'll be interviewing on Bad Faith Podcast?
Yeah. So tomorrow's episode will be about all of the criminal justice issues that have really shown its head in the last week or so. One of our guests is on the panel for tomorrow is Laura Bazelon, who wrote that piece back in 2019 about Kamala Harris not being a progressive prosecutor. And we talk a lot about prosecutors and the prosecutors' offices as part of the arm of enforcement that really gets under observed when we're having these conversations about abolition and criminal justice reform. And we also have some I don't know how much I should tease it, but we have some big guests that I'm very excited about coming up in the coming weeks. So you can listen for free wherever you get your podcast to our Thursday episodes, or subscribe at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast to hear our Monday episodes, and also to participate in our new Discord, which we're very excited about. And people in there have been very charming and sweet and nice so far. So knock wood, it
so
stays
far.
that way.
before all the trolls get in there.
Right. It's a good community so far. We're going to get some moderators. You want to be a Bad Faith moderator, join the Discord and make your case.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Briahna. Like I said, I appreciate you coming on. Everyone go check out Bad Faith Podcast. One of the best podcasts out there by far. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Briahna.
Thank you, Justin. It's very sweet of you to say. Stay safe.
All right. Yeah. Take care. Wow. Isn't she just the best? And Bad Faith Podcast, honestly, is just an amazing show. It's so informative. I use a lot of, the information I get from there, and just what I learned. Like I talk about, her interview with that Amazon employee so much, because I think it gets you an insight into like what an Amazon worker, right? Middle-aged Black man with a family working at Amazon, like that's salt of the earth, right? Bessemer, Alabama. You actually get an insight into what these people are actually going through, right? The real struggles on the ground. And it taught me what? It taught me that I shouldn't be pushing for a $15 minimum wage, because $15 is not enough. It's not enough. And if it's not enough in Bessemer, Alabama, it's not enough anywhere else in this country. So we should be pushing for $20. We should be pushing for $25. If we land on 20, okay. That's a start. But $15 by 2027 it's just, come on. It's a half measure. It's a half measure. It's not enough. It's not enough.